That's an interesting one that does read very hard edge from a distance, but up front you see how, you know, there's like an edge where you fall short of the outlining or this, you know, coming up close to this band, but it allows you to see the red under this, which gives it that sort of orange, so it's an over paint. And then this blue is very, very painterly and gives a modeling. It makes it seem a little bit more vibrant from a distance. In some ways, I don't know if you saw the Thornton Willis show that we had done, or if you're familiar with Thornton here in New York, but he's geometry and, you know, and they appear hard edge, but he's really a soft edge painter because he's very expressionistic. And the same thing, the edges become very important in his work and the surfaces. And they're, you know, to him, which kind of, and all ties back a lot to you, is what struck me about Thornton's work when I saw so much of it, because we did a painting survey that spanned 7 decades. And the thing that unifies Thornton's work is the geometric forms and shapes that hold that structure and organize it, because he came out of an architecture background. So and so he likes that organizing aspect of it. But beyond that, all bets are off. And so, but with Thornton, the thing that really struck me, it's the act of painting. It's that movement of the pigment. And you see it. I mean, he just cannot just paint something straight up and down. It swirls, it moves, it has edges, it has variations in thickness. And he doesn't really care if it's fully saturated, and he covers every square inch as he adds another layer. So there's always this sort of, you know, pedimenta, if you will, or residue of what was there, because he doesn't obsess with over painting and, I mean, you know, and getting everything completely filled in the square perfectly. It's to get to that essence and what's really motivating him. And it reminds me of what you had written, which was you want people to think of your paintings as an experience. And so that really kind of stuck with me, and I thought that's so interesting. That you two are about the same generation.
Yeah, I think he's a bit older than me. But
and so, but that to me struck me as very interesting in terms of this thinking about the viewer experience is driving you more than the formal concern, it seems like. And the formal is there to kind of get things going, but then it's the color, the surface, the light that seems to then really propel the painting to, like you say, resolution. Its resolution, which can vary dramatically. So it's that interplay of all those things, but you're thinking about the experience of people, you know, so there's this very empirical aspect of your work that seems like, just like with Thornton's, like they're an experiment. And so the outcome is empirically derived as opposed to being so rigorously put down, especially given your background as a writer, his background, you know, in architecture, which we typically think of as very structured and sort of having rules and norms that you stick with. And but you both seem to not worry so much about that. It's the act and the process, and then the resulting outcome, and they're equal in your mind. It's because, you know, it's some people, it's the outcome is what they're after. You guys seem to enjoy the process and feel that people experiencing that process by seeing it revealed, the literalness of it, is part of that outcome.
Yeah, I think there's some truth.
I don't know if that was overthinking it too much, but I've noticed it, which is so weird that you guys are back to back. When you look at your paintings, they don't look similar at all. But then when you live with them for a while, you realize, oh my goodness, these are really similar in the way you guys approach your paintings, and the fact that you're not obsessed with a rule and sticking with rules. And you know, it's not like you're running around with scissors all the time, you know, in your hands, but you sort of take a risk, it seems like.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, anything can happen in a painting of mine in terms of what kind of paint is it, what kind of application is it, etc., etc. My friend John Baldassare used to say his advice to young painters, young artists, was if you see a rule, break it. But that sounds like a rule in itself, actually, and that's why I'm sort of cautious.
And I'm sure you pointed that out to him.
Yes, yeah. And so,
his response was?
Fuck yourself.
Huh?
Go fuck yourself. Yeah.
So that's an interesting relationship, the two of you. Did you meet him just because you lived out there? Or
Yeah, he took me out there, actually.
Okay, gotcha.
To teach in Eichholtz.
Yeah. No, he was quite an interesting artist. And,
oh, yeah.
His paintings his work quite edgy.
Yeah,
so,
the opposite of mine, you know,
yeah.
in its way, yeah.
No, it's interesting. And so you guys were close?
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. I guess I didn't realize that. I figured you might have been, since you seem to have referenced him a few times and things. So
wrote about him too.
Yeah. So what other things would you like to talk about in either this new series or in your work in general that you may not have ever talked about, or you'd like to sort of reveal? I mean, you talked about the post-middleism, which I think is very interesting, and I see how you get to that, conclusion. And you seemed receptive to our thoughts about constructivism and suprematism, and.
Oh yeah, no, a lot of people point that out, by the way.
Oh, good.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
That's all fine. I mean, you could, if you thought of what are the sort of primary ingredients in contemporary modern styles that I work from, suprematism would certainly be one.
Because it's all about sort of sensation and experience in your provence.
Yeah. I think people would do well to think about music when they think about my work. I think that would be a good idea. Painting can be about architecture, it can be about music. Every art form is about some other form which it uses to be jealous of, to guide itself from, etc. Architecture, it's very hard to see an architectural reference in my work, although Bob Morris did, and I'm a friend of Frank Gehry. But my work has never really been about building one thing on top of another. It's been about ephemeral forms. You know, sound is ephemeral. It's not a thing. It never was a thing. There's no thing there to refer to, but there is tension, movement inevitably, because you can't have static music. Uncontrollability to a large extent. That's kind of important to me. So I think that more or less, and allowing for differences and all of that, the best way for people to think about my work, or to think about how to think about it, is music, and not any particular kind of music, although you could get there too if you probably wanted to. But music is this question of series that don't follow from one another, of signs that go together but don't follow from one another, of different kinds of tension, having to do with loud and soft, but also with what kind of instruments being loud, what kind of instruments being soft. I think that would be best. That would be more helpful at the end of the day than trying to, or at least more helpful at the end of the day than stopping with art world references, painting references, because you mentioned suprematism. Well, there's nothing nihilistic about my work, but there is about suprematist work.
There's nothing that's what?
Nihilistic about my work, but there is about Malevich. He says, I want to eat painting. I reviewed a book of Boris Groys's recently, and he's decided that the future of art goes to propaganda, which is Malevich. Or others like Eisenstein blatantly, and So propaganda on the one hand, and nihilism on the other. But having reviewed his book, and I liked his book and all of that, I thought, well, no, my work actually is about what Boris says you can't really do, which is contemplation. My work's about contemplation. That's why it's open to, the viewer has to have room to think and has to do some thinking. And this is where the point of colour really comes into play, because I do think Faucillon is correct that art has its own time, that it doesn't correspond well to historical time. There are no famous paintings painted on the first and last days of either World War, for example. They don't march in step. And contemplation is something that you have to have room to contemplate. And the fact that they're moving means they don't stop moving.
Mm-hmm.
And so the colour has to be a colour that starts something going. It might guide itself into a place where you can say, well, that's enough, for now. But there isn't any way in which it resolves in the way that, your example, hard edge painting, does sort of resolve. I'm not knocking it, but it does, in that respect, quite different things to me. It's very sort of logical. It's like this much black, these many black squares are matched with that many white squares. Variety and adjustment comes from what kind of black, what kind of white. But that's not the same, that's not really what I try to do. What I try to do is to get something going and take it as far as I can, which isn't the same as far as I need to take it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have to stop because I can't do anymore. So that's really how my works work. And that one took a year because it's about, I gave myself a year to make it. I ended up naming it after Emanuel Shinwell because it's it ends up being about getting somewhere where you weren't supposed to go. I think that's sort of closely approximate. It's not what it's about, but it's a close approximation to what it's about. Emanuel Shinwell was a member of Parliament in England,
mm-hmm.
Scottish, working class. So when he was a little boy, he decided he wanted to go to Oxford or Cambridge. People said, well, you can't go to Oxford or Cambridge because you don't go to a tough school where they teach Latin and Greek, and there's Latin and Greek exams to get it. But Manny had the good sense of knowing, well, I know people who know Latin and Greek, they're called rabbis. So you have the rabbis teach him Latin and Greek, and he passed the entrance exams with flying colours. The rest is history. He used to go on demonstrations with us in the 60s. And it just seemed like, it's not a narrative about that, but it has the level of complexity that has. And,
right.
Yeah.
No, that's an interesting one because there's, you have these we kind of walk down there, these motifs sort of emerge and this is another one that's sort of a slow painting. You need to kind of look at it a number of times and you pick up different things, but like this radiation, you do it with the red there and this sort of broken up one here, but they sort of, again, emulate here now 15 years later, these bars that you have or bands of color in several of these newer paintings. Mm-hmm. So that's what I was sort of picking up on is the fact that you tend to have this same sort of motif or something. And the one that you've talked about, the more gestural sort of limey green one up here, there's at the very bottom The only thing that's really distinct that stands out and almost becomes a focal point, oddly, is that sort of crisscross that creates that same pattern or motif.
Yeah.
And but anyway, it's an interesting thing. And then just also, this is a good example of how you fragment and subfragment. But up here, this is the area, and it's probably not showing up very well in this video, and it's very, very subtle. Are these value changes, or these changes, the shades of this sort of black and browns up here.
Yeah.
But what it creates when you look at it from a distance is you've got a diagonal. You've created this binary of light and dark, and then within this, so this is the one that I was thinking was, wow, this is sort of like pattern on pattern on pattern. And so when I think of that, I think of a number of the systemic pattern painters, like from the crisscross group. And the one that in particular comes to mind is Gloria. Sorry, her name is just blanking on me. But this sort of, just different sort of patterns emerging. And the only place where you really have a shift in scale is sort of right here in the center, where it's all a little tighter or subdivided. But anyway, it's just a very interesting painting, very dynamic, but there's a lot going on. It almost seems like there's more content there that's probably more deconstructed by each viewer, because everybody's going to have a very different impact on these very either angular ones or very modeled, sort of broken up pieces. Some of these colors, I mean, your colors are very referential in here. There's this sort of 50s sort of modernist sort of colors going on in here. The pinks, this aqua. So there's either like Florida experience or a mid-century experience.
In California.
Yeah, and so I figured California or Florida, but anyway, there's just a lot operating in there. So depending upon your age, you're going to read this painting very differently, I think. And but it's a very dynamic piece, and this is one where again there's not this rigorous application of color theory, but it has moments, like right here with this really nice breaking up band of the reds.
Where you need it.
To plums and purples and sort of browns, and then these little bit more optical sort of effects. And so it's a complex painting when you start looking at it more carefully in terms of how it was made. But from a distance, it just has this very nice composition that it just all works.
Yeah, I said like for years and years that certainly all through the 70s that I wanted to be like the Poussin of my time. And then just before I started to paint that painting, I realized why I said that. And the reason was it's spelled out by Mike Fried in his book on Poussin. And the thing that Poussin does that I've never heard other people be talked about in these terms, it doesn't mean they weren't. I'm not an art historian. But in Poussin, composition is like something between, there's an empty piece of sky up there. It's not balanced by another piece of sky down here, or even a piece of landscape. It's balanced by a man running. There's what can relate to what in terms of the elaboration of a compositional event is not the relationship between two things that are in two different states. It's two states which can be of very different things. And so that guided my balance approach in this painting. And so there had to be areas of the painting that were very different from one another, and different, I think, in terms of clarity, the difference between partially covered things like this yellow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Between these lines that come across and disturb the thing and settle out into the uncovered. These lines which have sort of nothing to do with these, but everything to do with them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things about the painting. It's one of the things about the painting that makes it so tight, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it seems different in this exhibition, but not.
Yeah.
And I purposely put it next to these two side by side because I think they have interesting shapes that relate, but also I think there's a visual dialogue, at least for me, that with this sort of patterning effect and but also that sort of reddish brown over there, and then just the way the subtlety of that blues and greens in the ground over there is similar.
Yeah,
the effects are similar, achieved differently. This is more geometric, that's more brushy, but the effect is the same when you look at them. That's why I thought they were really good as a pair.
Sure.
And so same thing with the other two paintings on the other side there. That's why we gave them more distance between each other, but we've created a shorter distance between these two to create a dialogue and those two. So we did some different things in the hang to try and pull some things together for people we wanted them to relate them together.
Yep.
And then we put distance where we didn't want people to be kind of confused.
Or where they, sometimes things have to go further apart than others so they don't interfere with one another too much.
So that's sort of how we did a number of the things in the show here that way. And because there's quite a diversity of color in this show, which is interesting. So hopefully people can view it in person. There's lots and lots of great installation images online and a video, an installation video. So hopefully people will be able to take a look at those materials, and we'll do a digital catalog with a lot of the installation images.
Sure.
And so hopefully if people enjoy these discussions and meeting artists like Jeremy Gilbert-Rolfe, then please subscribe to this series that we do. We do them for every artist. If it's an estate, then we talk to their friends or family members and things like that, but we feel it's really important to try and have the artist in their own words talking about the work. So if you enjoy these series, please subscribe, and you'll get notices. These are on our website and also on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. So thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
Sure.
And thanks for coming to New York.
Go for it.